Hey, Bad Vibes here. Today's stories are about house and dog sitting. Joining me is Papa Scare, helping me out with 2 stories. His links will be in the description if you enjoy his narrations. And sit back and relax. I'm currently writing this because I'm too scared to sleep after what happened 2 hours ago. I'm a 22-year-old female. I'm a dog sitter, and I stay in the client's home instead of keeping their dogs at my own house. I'm currently on a job and have been for about a week. Ever since the first night I got here, I've felt super unsettled to be in this house by myself at night. I didn't think there was any reason to be because this house is in a gated neighborhood in a decent part of town. It's right next to a freeway, so fairly busy streets outside the neighborhood. I figured it was just because of the antiques in the house, making it feel Haunted Mansion-esque. Anyway, the house I'm staying at is kind of on the outskirts of the gated community. It's on a little cul-de-sac with no neighbors on either side or behind. There's also a pedestrian gate to come in and out of the neighborhood right next to this house. Yesterday when I was leaving for work in the morning, I noticed that the pedestrian gate was wide open. I figured someone went for a walk or something and made a note to see if it was still open when I got back in the afternoon. Sure enough, it was still open and I went to go close it. The gate, however, was locked in position. It had one of those little lock bars in place, so it couldn't be latched closed. The bar would block it. I didn't have a key to this gate, so I was unable to unlock it in order to close it and relock it. Yesterday night after that, I had the worst gut feeling that something was going to happen. I also have severe anxiety, so I often just write things off as that. A bad trait to have as someone who regularly stays in houses all by myself. Anyway, I finally got to sleep last night and everything was totally fine. Today was normal and I was home from work all day, so I didn't even leave the house. I should mention that this house has a gated courtyard out front. I keep it locked at all times, though there's no way to get into the front or backyards of the house unless I let you in or you jump a wall or something. Around 9:40 p.m. tonight, I had just gotten into bed with a pup I was dog sitting and was about to fall asleep when I heard someone knocking hard on either the door or window of the house. There's about 5 sliding glass doors leading to either courtyard, backyard, or side yard, and I couldn't identify exactly which way it was coming from. The dog, of course, went crazy, and then knocking immediately stopped. Like I said before, there's no way to get into the house with the courtyard gate locked, so whoever was knocking had to have hopped over the wall into either the front courtyard or backyard. And if it was a neighbor or something like that, the dog shouldn't have scared them into stopping. I was obviously terrified and called my mom, who told me to call the police. She and my stepdad headed over. They live about 10 to 15 minutes away from where I was staying. The police dispatcher was a woman who totally understood how I felt. She told me to stay in the bathroom and if any knocking happened again before the officers got there, to call back. After I hung up with the police, I tried to call my mom back, but my phone suddenly had 0 bars of signal, which was just a terrifying cherry on top. The police came and checked out the perimeter, didn't see anything suspicious, and left. The part that really scares me is that it had been raining this evening, so I was reading with my bedroom sliding glass door open before bed. I usually go to bed later, but wanted to sleep early tonight. I was reading with my door wide open, and then took the pup out for potty in the back about 20 minutes before the knocking. It freaks me out that I could have been outside or vulnerable if I had stayed up as late as usual. Sorry if this was anticlimactic, but it scared the shit out of me, and now I can't sleep. I want to start by saying that this isn't my first bad experience I've had while dog sitting, but it's definitely the worst. So I started dog sitting back when I was 13 and made good money doing it. I'm currently 19, and this happened when I was 18. I set up an easy way for people to contact me about dog sitting. I put out posts on Facebook and Instagram about it often, and would get people in my inbox asking to dog sit. I got a notification from Instagram one day stating that someone was trying to message me. I accepted it, and the message said that me and my wife are looking to find a dog sitter while we go away to Florida for a week. You would have to work from the 4th to the 11th this month. We will pay you $300 for the week. You're welcome to stay at our house or go back to your own home. I started messaging back and forth with this man, and we're going to call him Mr. Brown for the sake of privacy. So I agreed to take the gig and told him that I would stay in his house for a week. Once I got to his house, I was introduced to his 2 dogs, Mina and Letty. Mina was a little Yorkie, and Letty was a blue hound. I was shown around the house, which was surrounded by 76 acres. I live in a farm town and live on 32 acres myself, so staying here didn't really freak me out. The closest neighbors were pretty far away, and you would actually have to drive there if you wanted to talk to them. They told me the rules. Then Mrs. Brown told me about the nearest neighbor. In her words, she said she was a nice person, just a little drugged up and confused. She mentioned how sometimes she would pull into their driveway instead of hers and would end up mistaking Mrs. Brown for her dead daughter. Hearing this made me feel pretty bad for her, and I know all too well how hard it is for a parent to lose their child because of how my parents were after losing my brother in a car accident. Miss Brown said that she shouldn't do anything bad though, and if she came up to the house, just point her back to home and she should leave with no problems. After they left, I was down to watch movies and just chill with the dogs. The first 2 days were fine, with no hiccups. The 3rd day, however, the old woman who I'll call Rose did pull into the driveway. I came outside as she was getting out of the car. She looked up to see me and immediately she got back into her car and left. I chalked it up to her realizing that she was at the wrong house when she saw me and went back inside. Later that night, though, I got a call from Mrs. Brown asking if I was okay. I said yes and asked why. She then went on to tell me that she just got a call from Miss Rose and that she said that there was a robber at their house. I explained what happened and she just laughed and said she must have been confused and forgot that we were out of town. I ended the phone call making note to go over there tomorrow to clear the air about me being the robber. Once I went to bed that night though, things got crazy. I woke up around 2 hearing light scratching sounds that sounded almost like ticking coming from outside the window. At first I thought it might be a bird or some sort of creature and left it alone, but the noise kept me from falling back asleep. I wanted to scare it away so I got up and went to open the blinds, but screamed when I lifted the blinds at the sight of Miss Rose trying to pry the window open with a pair of pliers. As soon as she saw me though, she started banging on the window with the pliers. The dog started barking now, and I quickly got up, told the dogs to follow me, grabbed my phone and ran to the room with no windows, which was the bathroom, locking the door just in case she got in. I called 911 and explained the situation, quickly giving them the address from what I could remember. They said that the police would be there in about 10 minutes, which for the area I was in was pretty good, considering their house was in a pretty rural area. I had gotten the dogs to be quiet and put them in the closet connected to the bathroom to make sure she didn't hear them. I was trying to stay calm, and I could still hear her pounding at the window as I continued to talk to the operator, and then I heard glass shatter. I cursed under my breath, trying not to cry. I was really scared and pretty much ready to cry from the fear of being beaten to death by someone who clearly was not in the right state of mind. I was whispering what was happening to the operator, hiding in the back of the bathroom in the tub. After about 4 minutes of pretty much silence, I heard footsteps and I could see feet under the other side of the door. I cursed to myself again. Then I see Miss Rose get on her knees and hands, looking under the crack of the door. I mistakenly let out a gasp. She started quickly pounding at the door. I could tell that she was using the pliers. At this point I'm crying and asking the operator where the police are, to which he responds, 3 minutes. Those 3 minutes felt like forever. I screamed at Miss Rose to please go away, and she screamed back, "You shouldn't be here." Once I heard the sound of police cars, and about a minute later, them trying to kick the door down, I felt a little better. I was told to stay on the line till the intruder was caught, and the police were now trying to get into the house. Eventually, they did get into the house, and I yelled to get their attention. Not that they needed it, she was still banging on the door. Once they got into the room, she was told to drop the weapon. She obeyed, saying that she didn't do anything wrong. They got her in cuffs, and a police officer told me it was okay to unlock the door, to which I slowly got up and unlocked it. After being taken to the police station and giving them my story for their report, I went to my parents' house. I was just too scared to be alone. The next day I called Miss Brown and explained the situation. I got full payment even after telling them that I wasn't going back to the house. They called me a few days later saying that Miss Rose was under the influence of drugs, and in her words, she told the police that she decided to take care of the robber herself and that she did nothing wrong. She was charged with breaking and entering, which is kinda ironic. After that, I quit dog sitting, and I'm a lot more paranoid, and I always make sure my doors and windows are locked. So, Miss Rose, let's not meet again. A few years ago, I had a dog sitting business with regular clients. One of these regular clients was a lady with a big nice house. There was a really long driveway leading up to the house, and it was tucked far back from the residential roads. It was somewhat isolated while being in a dark residential neighborhood. No one could drive to the house without being noticed. No one could park on the adjacent street. It would be very unusual for anyone to be walking up to the house or through the yard without having already parked in the driveway. Everything began as usual. I fed the dogs, gave them their various medicines, and played with them for a while watching movies. Best job ever. Eventually, I got sleepy and went to bed in the master bedroom, per orders. This room has huge, beautiful windows with a view of the driveway, the only normal access point. I like that about the room. After browsing on my phone in bed, I turned everything off and was trying to go to sleep. As I'm laying there, staring at the ceiling, deep in thought, I snapped to total awareness. Nothing changed. No one came up the driveway. Everything was silent, and yet I suddenly started to feel uneasy. The hair started to stand up on the back of my neck. A voice in my head was urgently saying, "You're being watched. Someone is watching you." My heart rate started to pick up. I had never experienced anything like this and couldn't explain it in the least. I called my boyfriend immediately, grabbed my stuff, ran to my car, locked the doors, and sped out the driveway. I glanced around the house while I was leaving and saw nothing, no one. When I got home, I checked every door to make sure it was locked and slept on the couch with a view of both entry points. The paranoia slowly dissipated, and I was eventually able to sleep. The next day I returned in the morning and took care of the dogs. I started walking through the house towards the back where the master bedroom was, and again started to feel really strange. Not a watched feeling this time, but a high sense of alert that things were off. I began to notice that candy wrappers were out that weren't out the night before. Doors were opened that I specifically closed to keep the dogs corralled. Things were moved. I left again and called my boyfriend to stay with me. I couldn't be there alone. Someone was absolutely in the house the night prior. I wondered if maybe someone in the family stopped by but I always was given a heads up with lots of warning before someone comes over. It's not too uncommon for the owner's son to stop by, but he has my number and also always gives me that heads up. I call the owner and tell her what I noticed. She told me that she'll call around to see if anyone dropped by. She calls me back in under an hour and assures me that no one did. It must be that old ghost, she says and giggles. What a relief that she was taking my safety concerns so seriously. I tell her that I'm having my boyfriend come over, just to be cautious. She didn't mind. A few hours later, my boyfriend and I get to the house. He checks it downstairs. Absolutely never am I to go upstairs, and everything was fine. We hang out for hours, playing with the dogs and watching movies. I left my boyfriend in the living room, walked past the front door to go to the bathroom around 10 p.m. I'm about to walk out of the bathroom and the dogs start barking. As I'm walking back, I see my boyfriend standing in the entryway by the living room. His focus is on the front door and tense like I've never seen him before. Again, the hair stands up on the back of my neck. He quickly ducks to the side of the front door window. Before I can finish asking him what was going on, he tells me, "Shh, someone's out there." He approaches the door and looks out, but the person was gone. I rush over to him and he explains that he was sitting on the floor in the living room when the dog started barking at the front door. My boyfriend goes over towards the door and sees a black figure peeking into the window and then walk off. When I looked out, no one was there anymore. I was absolutely terrified, so I text his son to make sure, again, that it wasn't him. Side note, a few weeks prior, he asked me to go to a wedding with him, and I gently replied, my boyfriend, who the son knew about, wouldn't think that was appropriate. So when I asked him if he had stopped by the house, he replied, "My girlfriend doesn't think it's appropriate that you're texting me so late." I apologized and told him I had a safety concern and it was important. I told him what my boyfriend saw. He simply responded that he didn't stop by. At that point, we were done for the night. We put the dogs in their kennels, waited for a little bit, and ran to my car. The next day, I very quickly took care of the dogs in the morning and left before the owner got back. I've never felt such a deep electric sense of immediate danger like I did that night in bed. That was just too much. When the owner asked me back a few months later, though I desperately needed money, broke student, I politely declined.
When I was about 12 and my sister was 15, our neighbor moved into the huge, expensive house across the street. He was in his 40s and married to a pretty young woman. They seemed like a very nice couple, and my parents made friends with them right away. That summer, our neighbor asked my older sister to house sit for them and feed their dogs and birds while they are away on vacation. They offered her the job because they figured that, as a young teenager, she could always use a little bit of extra spending money. I remember that they offered her an unusually high amount, maybe $1,000 for a week. She of course said yes, and all but moved into their house for the week, excited about the independence. The neighbor would go on to offer my sister the same job for the next couple of years, maybe once or twice per season, until she was about 17. Then they offered the job to me. I couldn't understand why they would suddenly switch sitters, but according to my dad, the neighbor had confided to him that he knew for a fact that my sister had spilt root beer on their sofa and not cleaned it up. She had just put a pillow over it and left it there. My dad, of course, apologized and offered to pay for it, but the neighbor said it was all right and that from now on, I would be taking the job. So I went over to be briefed on the house. The neighbor asked me to come at a time when his wife was away at work, so my dad, a protective father even though this man was his good friend, came over with me. He seemed surprised to see my father. While our neighbor was teaching me mundane things like the house code and which door to enter from, he mentioned the fact that I could sleep in the master bedroom if I so desired. He said that my sister had slept there too. He told me that was the best option because there was a very large shower that I was welcome to use, and also that the sheets are 600 count Egyptian cotton and perfect for sleeping naked. I politely thanked him, and then things got a little bit weirder. As he was showing me the food I was allowed to eat in the fridge, he pointed at the television and informed me that he had every channel available. Every single channel.
Even,
He said.
all the dirty ones.
He went on to laugh about how I was welcome to watch the dirty channels as well. He said that in front of my father. I was 14. My father laughed but inserted one of those very firm,
She won't be doing that.
type of things that dads do so well. The neighbor laughed too, and then said something along the lines of,
Well, maybe she wants to. If she does, that'd be fine. How would we know?
We laughed again. I'd always been closer to my parents than my sister had been, so while I was getting paid the same amount of money to house sit, I decided not to stay over. I would come over twice a day to pet and feed the dog and put the radio on for the birds. I didn't touch a thing in the house and was sure to be very respectful because of what my sister had done. Fast forward 6 or 7 years to now. My dad and the neighbor haven't talked in years. They ignore each other or give each other dirty looks from across the street. I would ask my dad why, and he would tell me it was none of my business. But I was a little sad that his friend and he were no longer talking, thinking that it was just a minor argument that had been blown out of proportion. It was not. Eventually, my dad told me that this friend of his had one day called him from his vacation in Barbados. When my dad answered, the neighbor said angrily,
I need you to go across the street and kick someone out of my house.
My dad was confused, and the neighbor elaborated. He had his nephew visiting from down south, and the neighbor had specifically told his nephew that his drug-addicted girlfriend was not allowed on the premises. The neighbor informed my dad that this nephew had not listened to him and that the girlfriend was over there right now. My dad asked how he could possibly know that, and the neighbor told him he had cameras installed in every single room of the house. I'm currently looking after a house and dog for my dad's friend. All has been going pretty well and it's a nice house. But on day one, I noticed a camera in the living room and flipped it straight away. I asked the owner if I could have friends over for my birthday, to which he allowed. I noticed the day after, the camera was flipped back up again. I figured it may have been a mate who thought he knocked it. Today after work, I was watching YouTube on the TV and had the volume at a reasonable level. But the memes kept getting really loud and distorted, causing it to get way louder. The neighbor begins to bang the door, so I let him in, a little shook. And he says, "Stop abusing the house. You've been loud 2 days in a row, and I know you keep flipping the camera because the homeowner said he can't view it." I was very shook at this moment, as my suspicion that someone had a key to the house and was coming in while I was gone was proved. As he also told me, I'm doing a good job cleaning because he's come in to check when I was out. He had also proven that the camera was for spying. I really don't know what to do, guys. I've got to look after the place for a week longer, and I'm not going in the living room now, as I can't flip the camera. But also, don't want to be spied on. Any advice? This so better be worth the money.
Some few months ago, a friend of mine in the Navy was given orders to be stationed in Virginia. She had attempted for a while to find a renter for her house, but was unsuccessful. Still hopeful, she offered to let me stay at her place for free if I helped find a renter and keep maintenance on the place. Apparently, she had to leave one of her cats behind. She had no room to take it. It seemed a bit of neglect if you ask me, but it wasn't my decision, and I love cats. Originally, I was pretty excited to live in her house for free. I lived in the barracks, and it can get cramped being in a small room with other people, so I accepted. When I got to her place, however, I was very disappointed. The house was large, but holy hell was it trashed. Junk laid all around willy-nilly, dust covered everything, fleas were everywhere, and it definitely smelled like cats lived there. This was pretty surprising to me, since my friend seemed like she was a pretty clean person, sadly mistaken. Still, I stayed a bit hopeful. It would be pretty simple for me to get some of my friends together to clean the place up and make it comfortable. I helped her finish packing, and we sat around and chatted for a bit. That's when she told me about her ex. He was Army like me, in a different unit than mine. Originally, he had been charming according to her, but had become unsuitable for her for whatever reason. When she called it off and told him that he had 2 weeks to leave, he became insufferably annoying and childish, hiding her boots, terrorizing the cats, leaving the place a mess, more than it already was, and parking his car behind her so that she couldn't leave without her pitching a fit. He eventually did leave, and that was the end of it. After she left, I pretty much stayed away from the place until I scheduled a day for me and my buddies to clean it up, dropping by every day to clean up the cat box and feed the cat. One night, however, after I had dinner with a friend of mine, she offered to tag along with me to feed the cat. She was one of the people that had agreed to help clean, so I figured it would be good to let her see the place to plan out what needed to be done. When we got to the house and stepped out, I remember hearing a loud rustling coming from the surrounding trees. I figured it was some animal. As I think back on it, it could have been my memory just making the situation worse, but it was a pretty big part of my memory. As I walked up to the door, I felt incredibly uneasy, like something was wrong and that I shouldn't be there right now. But I didn't want to waste my friend's time, so I shrugged it off. I was a bit confused when I went to unlock the door as well. The bolt lock was a bit finicky and sometimes wouldn't lock properly, so I often had to unlock it multiple times. That is, turn the lock, try to open the door, and then so on until it actually unlocked. This time, however, the door opened after the first turn. At the time, I mostly figured it was just luck, but in the back of my mind I pondered whether or not I had forgotten to lock the door to begin with. Either way, after entering, I was about to head upstairs to feed the cat, but when I attempted to flick on the lights in the entryway, only one of the two lit up, so I assumed it must have blown. But when I stepped closer to see, I stepped in a puddle of water, which caught me off guard. Upon closer inspection, I discovered that the light fixture was completely filled with water, and some leak from wherever was dripping water onto the floor. Additionally, I heard the light rumbling that, at the time, I assumed was the AC. I knew the AC was right above the entryway on the top floor, so I thought maybe it was faulty or broken, and it was maybe leaking. Great, I thought, more issues to address. Still, I was there for a purpose, so I told my friend to check out the place to get an idea of what supplies may be needed while I was upstairs to feed the cat. However, before I was even halfway up the stairs, my friend called me back down. She was standing in the kitchen by the back door that led to the porch. The glass from the shattered door window littered the floor. She asked me if it had been like this when I had left the place, but I could have sworn that it wasn't like that when I had left. After all, I'd only been into this place once or twice since the owner had left, and I was sure that the shattered window would have caught my eye. Judging by the placement of the glass, it had definitely been shattered from outside. What was strange, however, was that the door was still locked. Not sure if anyone was in the house, I told my friend to stay there while I checked upstairs. I had no weapons on me, and I doubt the place had any guns, but funny enough, my friend was really into sword collecting, and many of them were downstairs. I picked one of them up and tiptoed upstairs, hoping my childhood memories of stick fighting could possibly help me. Luckily, no one else was in the house, but just to be sure, we both waited outside while we called the cops. After calling the cops, I called up the owner and told her everything that happened. The obvious break-in was very strange. Nothing was stolen. The place wasn't in any worse of a state than when I left it, as far as I could tell. The only thing out of place was a broken back door window, that same door still being locked, and the possibly unlocked front door. At the time, I assumed the water was not associated with a break-in. Because of all of this evidence, we assumed that my friend's ex had done it, since he seemed that he was either looking for something, or just wanted to be destructive, and probably hadn't even entered the house. According to my friend, he knew that she was gone, but didn't know that anyone was watching the place, so he likely thought the place was fair game for vandalizing it. Still, beyond the window, I nor the police found anything else. That night anyway. After that event, I of course was still very uneasy about going back to the place. I never dealt with a break-in before, and then the assumptions that her ex was just being a dick and lightly vandalizing the place definitely made me not want to stay there for too long, for the fear that I might be around the next time he decided to come back. Still, the damn cat, no offense to it, was still there, and I couldn't just let it starve. So while the police were tracking down the proposed suspect, and the insurance company was getting the information, I had to still go to the place to feed the cat. I couldn't keep it with me because the barracks don't allow pets, and I had no friends that were willing to take it in. I won't lie, I waited a couple days to go back to the house. I had to work up the courage. I didn't even live there, and the prospect creeped me out, so I could only imagine how it would feel if it had been my place. Still, the cat needed to be fed, so off I went. When I walked in, the first thing that hit me was the smell. Mildew and mold. My barracks were loaded with it, but it was strong enough to even overpower the cat smell. The water leak had become even worse. The hardwood floors on the entryway had begun to warp, and the ceiling was drooping. Something definitely wasn't right. It hit me that the leak was much more serious than I first assumed. This definitely wasn't an AC unit. The roaring could still be heard too. Curious now, and not as panicky as my last venture in the house, I made my way upstairs, sword in hand. At the top of the stairs, there was a short hallway that leads to the master bedroom. Along the way, there's a storage closet. When I passed the closet, my foot made an audible squeak. There's water here too, which made sense because it was pretty much directly above the entryway, and both the AC and water heater were in the back of the closet. When I entered the master bedroom, however, there was no water, but the roaring sound was louder and it sounded more distinct and familiar now. Running water, like what you hear from a bathtub. Sure enough, I discovered a door in the back of the bedroom that I hadn't noticed before. It led to a half bath with a toilet and a sink, and in that room was another door. Sure enough, the noise was definitely a running faucet. The carpet in front of the door was soaked beyond belief, and the door was locked. Judging by the placement of the door, the room beyond would have to share a wall with the storage closet, and the tub would be literally right above the house entryway. At first, I figured I might as well bust down the door, since it was obvious that the tub had been long since overflown, and the water damage would already be a nightmare to fix. A broken door would be the least of the owner's worries. I stopped myself though. I didn't know what I would find behind that door. I didn't want to go in blindly, so I decided to call the police again and to get an officer to help instead. He was able to unscrew the knob and get it to open. Nothing was behind the door, but sure enough, the tub had been running and had overflown. We turned it off and the officer added more things to the report that already had been opened about the previous incident. Putting this all together, I think it's pretty safe to assume what happened. The vandal, almost certainly the owner's ex, had broken in the night, just before my friend and I arrived. That could have been the rustling I heard, or maybe my mind just tricking me. He had broken into the place from the back door by smashing the window and had likely left through the front door, which is why it was unlocked. Now, I'm not 100% sure if this next part was during the original break-in, or if he came back later to do it. But I think that while he was in the house, he went upstairs, plugged the tub, turned the water on, and rigged the door. The vandal obviously wasn't there to steal anything. Instead, he wanted to flood the house because he knew the owner would be away, and that water damage is a nightmare to deal with. I'm pretty sure he did this all the same night, and neither the police nor I discovered the water until a couple days later, which explained the leak I discovered during the break-in. Whatever the case, whoever did this is a vindictive piece of garbage, if you ask me. I'm not sure if they ever caught him or anything, or really about anything that ever happened. I just gave the key to the insurance people. They were well trusted by the owner, and decided to never go back to that place. Last I heard, she found some new tenants for the place, and it's been fixed up pretty well with no further issues.